being said, let's start with the carbohydrates, which we started out. That's our first macronutrient. Carbohydrates provides about 4 calories per gram. If we're looking at a label, 15 grams of carbohydrates is equivalent to about 1 serving. So if I'm looking at a label and I see something as 30 grams of carbohydrates, does that mean I can't have it? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that that would count as 2 servings of carbohydrates for the day. And we like to put making sure that we're not having too much per meal. So when it starts hitting about that 60 grams, that's when we want to get a little, focus a little bit more on maybe looking at something that's a little less in carbohydrate. I'll get to that more when we do label reading. So starting with the carbohydrates, what those do for our body, what they provide is energy. Carbohydrates are going to be our main source of energy. So when we are exercising, moving throughout the day, even thinking, we're going to be utilizing our carbohydrate source. So it is important that we do get this from good carbohydrates, your whole grains. So with that being said, the carbohydrates, what happens when we ingest them is they are broken down into glucose, and then we either use them, they're readily available for energy, so we either use them right away, or they're stored later as glycogen in our body. When our body then needs to utilize them again, they go to those glycogen sources, which are held in the fat tissues of our body, and we break them down into glucose even more, providing that energy again. So whenever we exercise, you talk to a lot of people, they tell you to have maybe some carbohydrates or a little bit more carbohydrates prior to your exercise routine. And the reason behind that is because you're going to be needing that energy, that immediate energy when you first go into workout. So there are 2 types of carbohydrates. We have our complex carbohydrates and our simple carbohydrates. Our simple carbohydrates are going to be those carbohydrates that spike our blood sugars more quickly. So when we ingest them, our blood sugars go up. Now, those are going to be things like your cakes, your cookies, sugar, honey. So those are going to be things that we want to use more minimally and try not to eat as much of and use it more as moderation. So a lot of the times we talk about honey, how that is going to be appropriate for the antimicrobial effects, antifungal effects, and that's fine to utilize that on oatmeal and different foods like that, but we need to still use it in moderation and keep in mind that it is still simple sugar and it's going to spike our blood sugar a little quicker. I see some questions coming in. What I'll do is go ahead and answer those after I hit each section, just so that I can kind of, get through it a little bit, so that I know you guys have to go back to work soon. So I want to get through it too. So I'll answer those questions in just a moment. So I'm not ignoring you. If you ask me a question, I will answer those. Now with our complex carbohydrates, what we're going to do is that's going to be your whole grains. So that's going to be your fruits, vegetables, whole grains. That's where you're going to be getting a lot of those healthier carbohydrates, making sure that we're utilizing those again for energy sources. It's really important to make sure we're getting those, because not only do they provide the energy, but they also provide magnesium, potassium, sodium. So they provide all the things that conduct our hearts, as well as convert glucose into energy. So magnesium is utilized for converting glucose into energy, and without magnesium, then we're not able to utilize that or store that. So I did get one question that was saying, what if we are wanting to lose fat? Should we not have the carbs before a workout? You still want to make sure that you're having carbohydrates before a workout. You want to maybe push it a little bit sooner, maybe about 2 hours prior to your workout, having something small. It doesn't have to be, a bowl of pasta. We don't need a carb load or anything like that. But you do need that initial kind of jump start. I like to think of it as like an ignition. So you put the key in the ignition and you turn it, and that's your jump start. And then the gas and the fuel that you're utilizing is burning off that carbohydrate, which will then eventually go to those fat tissue stores to burn off the glycogen. So it's really just that initial jump start. So we want to make sure we still have the balance of the carbohydrates in there as well to make sure we're jump starting that. In addition, our brain utilizes carbohydrate sources for energy. So when we're thinking through, what if we're studying for a test or we're working, our brain's utilizing the energy from our carbohydrates versus the energy from fat. So we do need the carbohydrates for that reason as well. So now moving into the next one, then our next macronutrient, it's protein. Again, that's 4 calories per gram. Protein is important for muscle building, tissue building. It's important for our hair, skin, nails, all of the building parts of our body. So what we have for protein are what are called amino acids. Amino acids are building blocks to create a protein. So with that, we have a simple protein and a complex protein, or I'm sorry, not a simple, a complete and an incomplete protein. So our incomplete proteins are going to be our plant-based proteins. So all of my plant-based friends out there, the foods that we're getting, the proteins we're getting are going to be considered incomplete. However, when you pair incomplete proteins together, they form a complete protein. A complete protein basically just means you have all those amino acids, those building blocks to create a protein. So if you are plant-based, we just want to make sure we're combining those protein or those incomplete proteins together to make sure we're creating a complete protein. Otherwise, our body is not able to build those muscle tissues and reform muscle after exercise. And so it's important that we have all the complete amino acids for building protein. With the kind of talking about how carbohydrates prior to exercise, what we also want to focus on is protein after exercise. And the reason behind that is it's rebuilding that muscle tissue that our body needs to rebuild. Now, our last macronutrient is our fat. That's going to be 9 calories per gram. So it is a higher calorie per gram for fat, which is why I know some of you have already done your nutrition plan and you've seen that fat tends to be a smaller portion size. So we get not as much of the guacamole or avocado or almonds that we all love because of the fact that it is a smaller portion size, but it is still very important in our diet. So we want to make sure that we do have that. So fat is important for insulation. We need it for muscle conditioning. We need it to carry fat-soluble vitamins throughout our body. So without those, we can't carry the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin K, vitamin E, vitamin D, which are all important for regulating blood pressure, blood clotting. So they're all going to be important for, and even inflammation. So they're all going to be important to carry those fat-soluble vitamins. So it's very important we do have fat in our system. And especially with my women clients, it's very important for having babies and being able to carry babies. So we definitely need to make sure we're getting an appropriate amount of fat, and then of course the right fats. So let's kind of talk through what is considered the right fats. So we have our saturated fat and our unsaturated fat. Our saturated fat is solid at room temperature. So if we think about making bacon on a pan and then you leave that pan of grease on the stove and it sits there at room temperature, it's going to solidify. So that's going to be considered a saturated fat. And those are the ones that do increase our LDL cholesterol, which is considered the bad cholesterol. So we want to make sure that we're eating less of that. So they recommends about around 13 grams of saturated fat per day. That's going to be things like butter, cheese, whole milks, ice cream, all those delicious things. And it doesn't mean, again, you can't have it, but we need to be careful about moderation and making sure we're doing it in smaller portions. So we still want to make sure all foods fit, but in moderation. There, of course, then are unsaturated fat. Our unsaturated fats are going to be your liquid at room temperature, so your olive oils, the oils that come from almonds, avocados, those are all going to be considered unsaturated fats. What those do is they lower our LDL cholesterol and increase our HDL cholesterol. So the way they increase the HDL cholesterol, and then the way they lower the LDL cholesterol is because the HDL goes in and pulls out that LDL cholesterol. So those are going to be all the macronutrients. Anybody have questions on those? If you need to unmute yourself, please feel free to unmute yourself. But anyone have questions on those? I know I went through them kind of rapid fire, so of course you can always email me any questions too. All right, so now in that same page, we talk about water. Water, of course, is very important. It helps to flush out any toxins that we have. It helps to aid in digestion. It helps to make sure that we're not holding on to a ton of sodium. So it helps with bloating and gas. And so making sure that we're keeping our tissues moist as well. So water is very important. It's recommended that you have about half of your body weight, about 50 to 55% of your body weight in water per day. I always recommend making sure you have something like this, like a nice water bottle that you can carry around. Try and make it a little bit bigger, but not to where it's like harrowing amount of water. But that way you can knock out a few of your ounces just by drinking 1 to 2 of those bottles. That makes it a little bit more helpful there. And then lastly, your minerals. These are considered your micronutrients. So they don't provide calories to our body, but they still have a very important role. So your micronutrients are going to be your vitamins and minerals. Your vitamins are organic, and they are broken down by heat, acid, or air. And then your minerals are inorganic. They're less likely to break down. So when you're cooking those, they're not going to break down as easily as the vitamins. So if we think about juices, for example, we're usually adding vitamin C back into the juice because it's been broken down, and you're losing that through that breakdown processing of the juice or of the fruit. So now vitamins and minerals are important to keep, again, your hair, skin, nails, all of those nice and healthy, as well as avoiding diseases like rickets, which is a vitamin D deficiency, scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency, and then blindness, which is a vitamin A deficiency. So if we're not getting enough of those balanced foods and nutrients, then that's where we're gonna see we might see the the deficiencies that in those. Okay, so that is going to be your ABCs of nutrition. So let's get into kind of label reading and talking through that. So the first thing with label reading that I like to talk about, and I know a lot of you I've talked to before, is the 5-15-7. So let's start out with, I have a couple of items over here, and that's what I'm looking at to see what I'm going to grab first. So when we're looking at our labels, we first want to look at the macronutrients. That's going to be the most important to figure out how many servings of fat, how many servings of carbohydrate, how many servings of protein do we have in this particular item. So with that being said, we have this here is an Artisan Bistro entree. It's chicken citron made with vegetables and grains, okay? So the first thing we're gonna look at is the fat. So the first, and if you can't see it, let me see, I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll just tell you since it's kind of hard to see it. But the first ingredient we're gonna look at is the total fat. Fat is going to be 5 grams is considered 1 serving of fat. So 5 grams of fat equals 1 serving of fat. So what I want to first look at is the fat on this particular entree. This is 8 grams of fat. So it would be considered 1.5 servings of fat. And then we have, we have to look at the serving size. So it's 1 entree, and there's only 1 serving per container. So this container is 1.5 fat. So the first thing we look at is the servings per container, and then the serving size. And then we want to look at the fat to see how much fat is in there. And we said 5 grams is equivalent to 1 fat serving. And then we have our carbohydrates will be our next macronutrient that we look at. And that's going to be 15 grams is one serving size. So this particular meal has 27 grams of carbohydrate. So that is 2 servings of carbohydrate. Can anyone answer in the chat box if, well, actually, I'll ask that in a second. The last macronutrient we look at is protein. Protein is 7 grams of, 7 grams is equivalent to 1 protein serving. So this one has 22 grams of protein, which is about 3 protein servings. So I want someone who I've done this with multiple times, and I know a couple of you I've done this with. So I want someone to tell me this particular meal with the grains, chicken, and vegetables, if it has 1.5 fat, 2 starch servings, 2 carbohydrate servings, and 3 meat servings, how many, is this an appropriate meal to have? For like, say, lunch. Let's just say lunch. So maybe Carol or Sharon, anybody? Okay. So yes, I like the confidence. Someone said yes with a question mark. But yes, this would be fine. 1.5 fat is really not a large amount, to have. And then 2 starch is not a lot, and then 3 meat is not a lot to have. Someone did point out that I didn't go over the allotment, so let me do that actually. I do have a sample person here. So let me go over what amount of servings is going to be appropriate for this person. So I have a 30-year-old female. She is 5'5", weighs 150 pounds. She is she wants to maintain her weight, and she works out about 1 to 3 times per week, just a light exercise. So based on that, to maintain her weight, she needs to take in about 1,900 calories per day. But if I'm breaking that down into a balanced meal plan, I want to break it down to about 25% protein, 45% carbohydrate, and 30% fat. So with that being said, I've broken it down even further. She gets 4 fat servings a day, 10 protein servings a day. And remember, 1 serving is equivalent to 7 grams, which is also equivalent to 1 ounce. So she gets 10 ounces of protein per day. Dairy, she gets 3 servings per day. Fruit, she gets 3 servings. Vegetables, she gets 4 servings. And then grains and starchy vegetables, she gets 7 servings per day. The grains and starchy vegetables are going to be your 15 grams of carbohydrates. That's how we're going to count that. So let's go back to that meal. We said she gets 4 servings per day of fat. So it's 1.5 fat out of 4 servings per day. 2 starch out of 7 servings per day. And then 3 meat out of, or 3 protein out of 10 protein servings a day. So with that, with me breaking it down that way, does that seem like an appropriate lunch portion to have? Lunch or dinner portion? Okay, perfect. So I have people saying yes. So that's very true. So it is going to be appropriate. We want to make sure that we're kind of sticking with around, for fat, around 1 to 2 servings per meal, depending on how much we get, but about 1 to 2 servings for this person would be appropriate. About 3 to 4 servings of protein, which again, remember that's an ounce, so 3 to 4 ounces per for protein. Your grains and starchy vegetables, about 2 to 3 per serving would be appropriate for this person. So once we get 45 grams of carbohydrates, appropriate, but once we get to that 60, that's where we need to be a little bit more concerned. Okay. All right, let me grab something else here. So these are some hash browns. It has 7 servings per container. So if and there's this is pretty much just a starch. We don't really have to worry about looking at the fat because it doesn't have any added, it's just potatoes pretty much. So we don't have to look at the fat. There's no added fat. There's really no added protein here. So if we're looking at this and it has 7 servings, half a cup is 1 serving size. I want, it's 16 grams of carbohydrates for half a cup. So if I have 1 cup of potatoes, how many servings do I have? If someone can answer that in the chat box. How many servings of starch? Awesome. Thank you guys. That's awesome. So yes, it'll be 2. So it's 2 servings. All right, let me look at, see if I can find some here. Actually, I'm going to save that one. All right, I know I've done these RX bars with a lot of you guys before. So if I have 1 bar is a serving size, it has 9 grams of fat. So someone can tell me how many fat servings that is. Remember, 5, 15, 7. So how many fat servings is it? It's going to be 2 because 5 grams is equivalent to 1 fat serving. And then the carbohydrates is 22 grams. So how many starch servings is it? 1.5. Yep, perfect. I have someone say 1.5. And then the protein is 12 grams. So how many protein servings is it? So protein is 7 grams per serving. Yep. So I have about, someone said 2, 1.75. So yeah, that's, I would just count that as 2 because that's pretty close. So now one thing I do want to note, because this particular bar is made with dates, we actually would end up counting that as a fruit serving because it would be 1.5 fruit because of the fact that it's made with fruit and there's no actual grain here. But that's pretty rare that you'll be counting it as a fruit. Unless it's like dominant, like this one is with the dates, it's going to be likely just counted as a starch if it's the 15 grams. So just remember, 5 grams is equivalent to 1 fat serving, 5 grams of fat is equivalent to 1 fat serving, 15 grams of carbohydrate is equivalent to 1 starch or fruit serving, depending if it's made with fruit. And then 7 grams of protein is equivalent to 1 protein serving. So 5, 15, 7. So just remember those numbers and remember you're looking at your macronutrients, okay? All right, last thing is sugar, and I'm gonna go over this pretty quickly. I know you guys probably have to get back to work, but the last thing is gonna be sugar. So what I wanna just talk about is really what sugar can do to our bodies. We know that when we ingest sugar, it can cause that spike in our blood sugar. Then what happens is it just dramatically decreases it. So what happens is we have this constant highs and downs, ups and downs, which can then cause diabetes. It can cause weight fluctuation. So we want to make sure that we're being conscious of how much sugar we're eating per day and the types of sugar we're having. So the first thing I want to talk about is natural sugar. So your natural sugars are going to be things like whole fruits. So keep in mind I'm saying the word whole fruits. And those are going to be associated with fiber and nutrients, and that's why they're considered a natural sugar. The second thing is going to be dairy products. So your yogurts up to 7 grams. And then, so anything over that 7 grams, we count as added sugar. And then your milk up to 12 grams. So again, anything over 12 grams, we count as added sugar. So for example, I have our Chobanis. I know I've showed you guys a lot of you this before. This is a regular Chobani. There is 16 grams of sugar in this. So how much added sugar is in this? If 7 grams is considered natural. Correct. So 9 grams of added sugar. This one has 9 grams of sugar in here. So how many grams of added sugar is in this one? 2. So perfect. All right. So I have 9 in here, 2 in here. This is probably going to be the better option. For women, it is recommended no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day. So that's, you know, if we're doing something and it has 9 grams of sugar, you've used almost half of your sugar per day. And then men is no more than 30 grams of added sugar per day. So we want to make sure we're looking at ingredients. So I saved this one because it is dark chocolate nutty bits. I wanted to save this to kind of go over. So for 3 pieces, this has 14 grams of fat. So 3 servings of fat, and then 14 grams of carbohydrates, so 1 starch serving. Not really much protein, only 4 grams, so I'm not gonna even count that. But in 3 of these little pieces, which they don't look that big, it's 8 grams of sugar. So again, you're utilizing a lot of sugar in just this one little product. So I've told some people that go to Trader Joe's, they'll hold the cone. That one, it's like a little tiny cone. I recommend those, or maybe small dark chocolates. Those tend to only have about 3 to 5 grams of sugar. 12 grams of sugar in, I had someone ask me, can you tell us again how many grams in milk? So it's 12 grams is considered natural. So if you do something like kefir or chocolate milk, anything above that 12 grams is considered added sugar. And then for women, no more than, I had someone ask how much for women, it's no more than 25 grams of added sugar. One last thing I want to show you guys are these naked drinks. I know a lot of people have them. So this has, you have to watch out for labels here. This is where label reading becomes important. We want to watch out for the fact that this says 57 grams of sugar. However, right below it, it says 0 grams of added sugar. So looking at the ingredients here, yes, they didn't add any sugar to this. However, it has 1 1/4 mango, which is probably about 2 servings of fruit because mangoes are pretty big. 1 3/4 apples, that's another 2 servings of fruit, so that's 4. Half of an orange, we'll just count that as another 1. And then 1/3 of a banana. So we're looking at about 6 fruit servings per day, and that sample person I gave you gets 3 servings per day of fruit. So by drinking this, she's drank 2 whole days of fruit just in this little 15-ounce bottle. So it's important to make sure that we're choosing foods because something like that will spike your blood sugar very quickly because it doesn't have any fiber surrounding it. It doesn't have anything to help slow down that digestive process, and it spikes that blood sugar pretty quickly. So that's kind of a quick hit on balanced eating as far as, you know, the carbohydrates, proteins, fat, quick hit on servings and how big they are and label reading, and then as well as sugar. So I'm sure there are still some questions, and I'm sure there's still plenty of things that we can talk through, but I wanted to just give you some information on it, maybe keeping an eye on different foods labels and looking at them and just keeping an eye on seeing how much carbohydrates are in them. And so I don't want you to be afraid of carbohydrates, but I want you to just be conscious that, you know, when we go above that 45 grams, that's when it's starting to get a little bit higher. And same with fat. I know a lot of people are nervous about fat, so maybe making sure that we're looking at that 5, 15, 7 when we're going grocery shopping. So, all right. So I know that was a quick hit, but any questions? Did I answer all the questions? So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me. Again, if you jumped on here and I did not get your name, please let me know your name. Like if you didn't put in the chat box, I'm going to scroll back up and see who put their name in the chat box, but I want to make sure that I get everyone who attended and they can get a ticket. And then we will have another group talk 2 weeks from today. I have to look at what I'm doing there. I can't remember what I was going to talk about, but I'll look at that and tell you guys before I send it out, of course. So let me know if you guys have any questions. Feel free to email me. You have Jordan's email as well. Feel free to email her any questions, and we'll go from there. So I'll hang out for like another couple minutes, just see if you guys have any questions, and I'll jump in if you do, okay? Thank you, everyone, for coming.
So Bree, I unmuted.
I hear you.
Okay, when you said the 25, 25 grams per sugar added, that's only stay below that, or you?
Yeah, so no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day. So what that basically means is like, again, if you go above, like with that yogurt we talked about, if that's
Right.
9 grams, then 2 grams is considered added. And then like breads have added sugar as well. So we have to consider that too. So maybe like 2 to 3 grams. So there's, 6 grams of added sugar in that. And then we have, you add up throughout the day. So then if you have something like this that has 8 grams, you're at, 15 or 16. So you just have to be conscious of that, how much you're having, and really looking there's so much hidden sugar out there. So you have like your granola bars, your, cereals and granola in general is kind of one of the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for? But basically they're the ones who hide a lot of that sugar.
About I told you I like oatmeal, so I get the flavored kind. So that's probably added sugar to that too, right?
Yes, that's going to be added sugar on that. So I would look at how much you have there. And then again, if you're doing something like that, if you're going to do the oatmeal and say it has 9 grams of added sugar, that's pretty high. I'd rather you try and stay below 7 grams, but the 9 grams of added sugar, just keep in mind then what you're eating the rest of the day. Maybe don't have your yogurt that day, or don't have chocolate that day or something like that. So just making sure you're being conscious of what else you're eating throughout the day if you're going to have the flavored oatmeal. Otherwise, try and, just get the steel cut oatmeal and do like some honey, like a teaspoon of honey is 4 grams of added sugar. So that's only 4 grams versus 9.
Right.
Adding some maybe strawberries and blueberries or raisins, because the raisins would go towards fruit servings.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bree.
You're welcome. I'll see you next week.
All righty. Have a great one.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye.
Anyone else have questions? Okay, well, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me by email. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll do this again in a couple of weeks. And I'll send you the topic. I just, for some reason, cannot place it in my brain what it's going to be. So I will send that to you guys, of course, the day before, so you have it. And, try and get everyone to come and join. But I will also let your friends know and colleagues know that I will email them the link for this recorded session. I did forget to start recording for like the first 5 minutes, so I won't ask any questions on that. So I don't think I said anything that exciting though. So, all right, thanks guys. Have a good one.